Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are excited to discuss cannabis in New York with you here today. My name is Chally Comer. I'm a principal at Capalino. I'll start out by just covering a few housekeeping items here. The most important of which is that you can submit your questions through the Q&A button at the end. We're going to start out our program today with an overview of different aspects of the adult use market in New York, and then we'll open everything up to Q&A. So please submit your questions as we go along. Thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited to connect with our colleagues in California. Our firm has had a great partnership with EKA for many years and we've learned lots of great things about overall regulatory and lobbying processes in California, as well as specific details on the cannabis industry in your state. A little bit more on our firm. Capalino is a leading urban strategy firm in New York. We're dedicated to helping our clients attain long-term success through a host of professional services. Our services are focused on strategic planning, lobbying, finance, sustainability, social impact, and real estate. So you'll be hearing from representatives from each of these practice areas today, and we'll be speaking specifically to the impact on the cannabis industry. Capalino's been engaged in New York's cannabis policy since the beginning. Our team's been working with city and state officials, advocacy groups, and business leaders to help shape the marketplace and ensure a sustainable future for this growing industry. I've worked for about 4 years focused on the cannabis industry in New York, and we've worked with a number of clients in the space over the years. We've worked with companies from out of state, including California, while we've had a medical and hemp market. And we've also worked with some CBD producers. So both on informing the regulatory processes and overall agency processes for those aspects of the market, as well as advocacy as we've been preparing and working toward a legalized adult use market. Our firm is based in New York City, but we do work across the state and have expertise in both city and state regulatory and legislative processes. For instance, my background actually includes working, directing the New York City office of the state Department of Agriculture and Markets, in which I worked on processing and distribution infrastructure development and regulation across the state for food and agricultural products, including hemp. So that's one of the areas from which I approach this industry. It's certainly an exciting time in New York. It's been a hectic few weeks for us since the state budget passed. And we've been having a lot of conversations, both with people on the industry side and on the government side related to this industry. We've all worked to get the most up-to-date information that's available in our various areas of expertise to share with you today and help you learn a little bit more about general processes in New York that we have for related hospitality, consumption, retail, processing, and real estate aspects of any industry, but then specifically what we can learn today about how cannabis will shape up. We do anticipate a timeline of 16 to 18 months before retail and on-site consumption operations will be able to open their doors. But there is, at the moment, significant work to be done and significant opportunities, especially for experienced out-of-state operators to get involved with program development and details. So, and you all know also as well, just the amount of time and effort that goes into preparing an application. So the time is now to both start on the application process and to help our state do right and do well as we expand our market into an adult use space. So for more on the state legislation process, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Tanisha Walker-Miller, who is our expert on state legislation.
Thank you so much, Chally, and hello to everyone who is watching. Again, my name is Tanisha Walker Miller, and I am one of the principals at Capalino+Company. Sorry, Capalino, no longer Capalino+Company. Got to get used to that one. I have been with Capilino for now 7 years, and I head up the state lobbying aspect of Capilino, as well as the minority women business practice group here at the firm. And we're here to talk about an issue that has become quite popular and quite dear to all of us that's on this team. MRTA legislation that recently passed makes New York now the 15th state to pass the robust piece of legislation regarding cannabis. And with it, we're looking at for New York to get a robust amount of money in terms of about $300 million in tax revenue that is scheduled to come to New York as a result of cannabis now being approved here in New York. Now, with any piece of legislation that's passed, as many of you probably know, there are some pros and there are some cons to legislation. One of the pros is that we actually did it, we got it done. One of the cons is even though we've done it, there's always room for change. And with this legislation, we are coming to see that there's a lot of regulatory issues that have been brought up. There's a lot of policy and foundations that have been set for us to begin our process. But again, all it is right now is our foundation, and there's always room for wiggle room for change with any legislation that we have. With this particular legislation that passed with MRTA, we're looking at having the Office of Cannabis Management. This is going to be the main office that's going to control how the policies and regulations are going to be handled for licensing and permitting when it comes to the state of New York. This board here in New York is going to be made up of a series of representatives, just so everyone knows and everyone's clear on that. The office is going to be set in Albany, but we're also going to have a New York City office, as well as some sub satellite offices along the way. And then in terms of the board itself, it's going to be made up of appointees. These appointees will be from the governor's office, there'll be three. From the Senate, there'll be one appointee, and from the Assembly, there'll be one appointee. Each of these appointees, which make up the five-person board, are going to be the main policy issuers to guide us in terms of CCB, as we call it, for the control board. I know in California, you guys have your own version of the CCB. And here in New York, we have the Cannabis Control Board. Now, one of the things that I want to point out to you guys in regards to our Cannabis Control Board is they're going to be the ones to actually issue as well as refuse license and permits here in New York. They're going to have the sole discretion in terms of helping to regulate the number of licenses that are going to be issued. And they're also going to be the ones to decide, along with our advisory board, on exactly what are the key regulations that are going to make up the Office of Cannabis Management. The Office of Cannabis Management is going to be led by a chief executive director. And we will also have regulations that are going to be put in place for the ED, as well as what we call a chief equity officer to follow and manage the state cannabis advisory. Now, with the CCB, there's going to be some regulations that all of you should be aware of. And one is that there are some prohibitions that are being put in place with the regulations in terms of what the ED, the chief equity officer, and the state cannabis advisory board will be able to do in terms of regulations. So for those who are in the cultivation, manufacturing, and processing, as well as the delivery and testing aspects of cannabis, there are going to be regulations that they are going to be putting forward that you guys should be aware of. One of the things I want to mention to you is that here in New York, you will not be able to take cannabis from one state to the next. We do not allow for state to state here in New York. due to our federal policies. As you guys know, there are no state policies, federal policies in regards to distribution of marijuana. So you will not be able to transport here. So anyone who is a cultivator that's looking to do business here in New York with a distributor, you will have to work with a distributor here in New York. And if you are a distributor, you will have to purchase here in New York. So you cannot do state to state, just so we understand that. So being in California, you will have to create your plants here in New York and sell them here in New York. The other piece I want to bring to your attention is that the CCB is going to work with the Department of Agriculture and Markets Department, as well as the Department of Environmental Conservation to determine the rules and regulations of safe productions of cannabis. So that includes like the safety regulations in terms of the packaging. They'll be working to make sure that, there's restrictions on what type of water, pesticides, regulations and monitoring will be taking place when it comes to the distribution. So we want to make sure we have safe products at the end of the day. The Office of Cannabis Management is going to be the overall, as we like to put it, the overall overseer who's going to handle the day-to-day management of the licensing application, which is what a lot of you guys are very much interested in knowing, is how many licenses will be allowed, when will the licenses and applications be ready. I hate to be the bearer of bad news for you, but we do not have the licenses ready to go just yet. We want to make sure that our Office of Cannabis Management actually has everything put in place within the next few months to make sure that we're not missing anything, so that the documentation and applications are correct on the first try, so that everyone will be able to apply equally. We want to make sure that, folks understand that if you are in the area of doing cultivating or processing, you will be allowed to apply for one license. We also want to make sure that if you're a distributor, that you understand that you can also work with a cultivator when it comes to licensing. But if you are in the area of on-site consumption, then you will not be able to get a license with a cultivator. Those will be separate. And I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions in regards to this, so I will leave you there. But as you can see, there's a lot to this legislation, and you're going to want to probably ask a lot of questions, and we'll be able to answer as many as we can. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jeff, to give you some more insight in regards to the overall on the economic development program.
Thank you, Tanisha. Appreciate it. Hey, everyone. Jeff Lee here. I'm a principal at Capalino. I'm in Capalino's business strategy group. We're the section of the firm that works with companies that are looking to innovate and are looking to learn about new markets and develop strategies for new practices, new products, new services, and how to do that in an intelligent, strategic manner. I've got a background just relevant to the topic of cannabis. I've been practicing in economic development and community development for a couple of decades, and really excited to be talking to all of you today. So thanks so much. I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic development incentives that may be available to different parts of the cannabis creation chain, value, and supply chain. You folks probably know some of this, but just real quick, we can break down these incentives in a couple of ways. We've got statewide incentive programs, and we have local incentive programs. We also have discretionary incentive programs, and then we have as-of-right incentive programs, and so we'll go into all of those. Discretionary versus as-of-right, just really briefly, as-of-right is there is no person that is really needs to be persuaded in order to grant your project those incentives. It just means you either qualify or you don't based on some documents that you're going to submit to a government agency. Discretionary is there is the opportunity, but it's not guaranteed, and there may be some persuasion involved. So just diving in, I know that a lot of folks here are thinking about the downstate, as in sort of New York City's 5 boroughs, the opportunities for retail, and there possibly may be opportunities, companies may be thinking about other aspects that may be taking place in the downstate region, such as distribution, maybe some processing. So just a little bit on what's happening in the downstate region, and caveating all of this, this is very early. Economic development folks that we've spoken to in the past month acknowledge that this is all very early. This is moving very quickly, and they are racing to try to catch up to the reality that this program is live, or at least it's been legislated into existence. But in New York City, there is a potential for discretionary tax benefits. One example is the New York City Industrial Development Agency. That would be things such as cultivation, processing, distribution. Those types of operations within the 5 boroughs might be eligible. There might be less from that program on retail. Conversely, talking about as of right tax benefits, there may be some benefits. I'll just throw out one. Don't want to get into too much of the acronym soup, but REAP, Relocation Employment Assistance Program, is one, particularly for businesses that are staying out of the main business corridor in Manhattan and either going to Northern Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, or the boroughs. Can be very valuable. So that's a little bit on sort of downstate specific stuff. Want to mention that every county and many big localities, cities, and other big metropolitan regions throughout the state have their own local incentives, which is usually through an IDA, which is an industrial development agency. And they've got a lot of appetite for this stuff. We were just looking at how about an hour and a half, 2 hours north of New York City, in I believe Orange County, the local IDA there has committed millions of dollars on a cannabis processing and cultivation operation. That is something that's likely to be replicated throughout the state. You're going to see a lot of areas, particularly those that are hungry for job opportunities and hungry for economic activity. You're going to see real appetite for providing incentives for those kinds of programs. And then I want to finally, that's local. We're just talking about the local tax incentives, whether it's county level or municipality level. Want to briefly talk about statewide programs. So when we talk about the state, there's an agency known as ESD, also known as Empire State Development. ESD is the one responsible for sort of statewide programs. The best one, most popular one is known as the Excelsior Jobs Program. They're also a typically annual competitive grant process and incentive process known as the Regional Economic Development Council, or REDC, also known as regional councils. So those are some opportunities. It's unclear how the state sits in terms of these, because there's some concern that while cannabis is still a Schedule I drug on the federal basis, they're not that worried about attracting these kinds of businesses. But they have also signaled that when it comes off, to the extent that it eventually does come off the schedule, there may be opportunity for very generous ESD statewide benefits. Happy to talk about that some more. You've got our contact information, and even though we're throwing out a lot of information, we are always happy to have a more deeper follow-up on any of these topics. So that's just a primer. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Brooke Schafferin, who is an expert on all things permitting, approvals, and a lot more. Brooke, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And that's a very, very generous description. I'm not ready to take on that mantle entirely, but welcome to everybody. I have been certainly trying to become an expert on many of these things. I've been with Capalino for just over 13 years and focusing in our permitting, licensing, and community engagement as it involves those types of things. And so certainly we focus a lot on real estate and construction permits, et cetera, and the build out of places. But before coming to Capalino, I was in the hospitality industry for almost 20 years. And so it was a natural fit to do a lot of work with hotels and restaurants, bars, and helping them work with not just getting their construction permits for build outs, but working with community boards and in some cases helping them understand their needs for operation to be able to get through that process. And so certainly, as Tanisha had talked about, there's a lot that we do not know yet. I'm going to apologize to the group. This is Zoom land, so the dog, of course, only wants to move and walk around now that I'm on camera. So we'll see if the barking stops, or starts rather. The whining has started. But so forgive me. So through the liquor license process, a lot of this legislation is going to mirror that, and a lot of things will not. And it remains to be seen what will be. So some of the things that are really similar for the New York process, and you guys, I believe, have a CUB, right? That is more like a land use process that I think takes a long time. And so for us, for the liquor license process, it can take a certain, it's a number of months. There's a 30-day notice that you give to the community board that you intend to file. If you're looking for liquor, it's with the state liquor authority. Then you go to the community board. It's a non-binding resolution. If they say yes, then the state liquor authority says yes. If they say no, you might be able to get a yes, but it's a whole lot harder. For cannabis, the outline is similar so far. There will be a 30-day notice to the community board. It's not yet clear if community boards are going to lump in with their existing committees that handle liquor licenses, if cannabis will become part of that, or if some community boards will have different committees, and that will probably relate to where in the 5 boroughs you are and what their capacity is, how many applications they get, and obviously the social equity piece is totally new. So how people are going to handle judging, right? 50% of applications in New York City, or New York State rather, are going to have to go to social equity applicants. So how that works, who the nonprofit is, who their partner is, who actually has the money to be able to do all of these things, what the community is who's actually benefiting. All of that is going to be very new and require a lot of education. And in talking to some community board members, they're prepping for waiting for that information to funnel down to them so that they can understand how to go about that process. So there are some things that will be similar, the 30-day notice, and then you'll present. The nature of the application is much more involved. The number of licenses will be much smaller than the number of liquor licenses. So there's sort of that balance of, you're not going to have the scale of liquor licenses that community boards, some of them are used to, like in Greenwich Village, downtown Manhattan, et cetera, Brooklyn. But there will be this whole social equity piece. So it might get a lot harder. So it'll be interesting to see where the similarities are. One thing also is that for offsite, like a liquor store, you don't need to go to the community. For offsite here as a dispensary, you will need to go to the community. So that's going to be a little bit different. The rules about how close you can be to a school are a little bit different. So some of those things have been written into the legislation, and some of those things will be rolled out with the state, and some of those things will be community by community. How they're going to handle the zoning, what type of building you have to be in, all of those things are being sorted through, one hopes. And with that, I can give it over to Richard Barth, who can speak more about land use and zoning and where these buildings can be.
It's nice to meet everybody. Richard Barth. I co-lead our land use group here at Capalino. I just want to spend a couple minutes on my background and what the land use group does before we get into what the rules may be for retail and other kinds of cannabis uses in New York City. My background, I was primarily in the Department of City Planning in New York. I was executive director for 12 years under Mayor Bloomberg. So I had authority over all 5 boroughs, which has given me a great understanding of land use, real estate, and regulation in the 5 boroughs. And previously I'd been the Manhattan Planning Director. So I bring to this position good experience in terms of land use, regulation, and all the processes that often come along with putting a use and opening the doors in the city. I co-lead the land use group. And what we do here is we provide a suite of development and strategic real estate services to help clients at every stage of the development process. We call it, to be a little trite, from soup to nuts. We focus on identifying and evaluating new development opportunities, sites, formulating and implementing strategies to reduce risk, and securing land use approvals if they are needed and other kinds of entitlements across a broad range of projects. And our expertise within the group extends to land use, zoning, real estate, and development strategies, and site identification and entitlements. We recently formed in Capalino Ventures LLC, and that's a wholly owned subsidiary of Capalino. And what the Ventures Group is specifically designed to do is to assist developers, private equity firms, and broker-dealers to secure financing, as well as mitigate risk for a range of projects, large and small. Capalino Real Estate works collaboratively with Ventures as we work with collaboratively with all our practice groups in the firm to really provide services that can help get projects through the process. As Brooke has stated, there's a lot we don't know at the local level. A lot of the rules will be set at the state level, but still at the local level, it's still undetermined what kind of layers the city may decide, New York City, may decide to put on top of what gets done at the state. I think primarily, first, it's you may hear an acronym called ULURP, which at all costs, we all like to avoid ULURPs. We try to advise our clients to avoid ULURP because that adds quite a bit to the process to get approvals to open the door. So it's kind of we believe that it would primarily be the state setting guidelines for what can be done, and the city may layer on some other requirements. Something like retail consumption sites, I think bottom first order of business is where are these allowed? If you look at them as kind of retail operations, use group 6, which are restaurants, other local businesses, they're allowed throughout the city. Large parts of the city, there may be constraints in terms of location near houses of worship, near schools, but that's probably will be the primary location. And then what Brooke talked about the approval process mirroring what the state liquor license might be, that'll be kind of the layer on in the city. But we don't know for sure what that will be. But we do have a lot of experience in zoning and retail and where things are allowed. Warehousing and distribution facilities, these are, again, we don't know the specific requirements, but these are allowed, tend to be in industrial areas and certain commercial zoning districts, which in some parts of Manhattan, but primarily these are in the other 4 boroughs outside Manhattan, and there are fewer locations for that. And warehousing with e-commerce and everything has become a hot commodity in New York City. 10 years ago, it was moribund. Now it's a very vibrant, these industrial areas that had no activity have a lot more. So we expect that in these areas, keep in mind there will probably be parking requirements. There's loading requirements. For the retail, that's less the case because given the size of probably future retail consumption sites, parking requirements gets waived out. But for distribution, warehousing facilities, that will likely be a factor in terms of sites. And the other thing that I mentioned, there may be maximum site sizes, particularly with retail. We don't yet know how that will play out in terms of some of the other characteristics of the retail and consumption regulations. Ultimately, we're hopeful that putting aside the licensing requirements, that most of the uses will be allowed in what we call in New York an as-of-right basis and won't have to go through a separate discretionary process. But that is one of the things that's still to be determined. So I think in summary, there's a lot we don't know. We have a good sense of land use zoning, where things are likely to be allowed in New York City. And we're really paying close attention to what these rules may be, and then what kind of activity at the city level what kind of regulations that are likely to be put in place. So that's kind of a capsule summary. I'd like to turn it back to Charlie, who's going to coordinate the Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Richard. Thanks so much, everybody. And just a reminder, please use the Q&A function to submit questions to us that you have based on some of the processes we have in New York and some of what we've covered here today. One thing I just strikes me that I wanted to address initially is just the scale of the market that we're anticipating here. A common question we're getting is how many licenses will be permitted in New York? The answer is, at the moment, we don't know. What we do know is that it won't be I believe there's something like 14,000 licenses in California. It will not be to that scale, which is, both good and bad, right? They're going to be there's going to be a very rigorous application process. They're going to be looking for experienced operators with knowledge and experience in the industry, as you might anticipate. And for those with that experience, it's a great opportunity. We have a really unique marketplace here. We're hearing a lot from broader industry what an appealing market, and from an investment standpoint, what an appealing market New York is, given the concentration of consumers we have here in the big city, as well as the scale of tourism and whatnot that we have. So those are some of the things that we're navigating as we're thinking through this, but that is one thing to inform our policymakers of at the moment. At the same time, some of the limitations that we are anticipating that could be challenging are things like on-site consumption. We believe at the beginning, and what we've learned so far, is that any kind of on-site consumption will be truly restricted to only use of cannabis. There, at the moment, are discussions of no allowance of anything, not even beverages, not even coffee or food or anything like that. People who own or operate an SLA approved facility, like a bar with liquor license, are permitted to own both a liquor license and a cannabis license, but they're not allowed to do that on the same premise. And actually a few other things. Brooke, could you speak a little bit about some of the restrictions we have here in New York around areas for smoking and how it's going to apply to cannabis? It's going to be the same for tobacco and cannabis.
So thank you, Charlie. Certainly, and also just one note, as Charlie was talking about food, right now, like with a liquor license, there is a requirement for food. It's not clear yet if there's going to be a requirement to have food at on-site, at a lounge, if there's going to be a requirement for non-cannabis, not edibles, for regular food for consumption along with cannabis consumption. So that's one of the things that has not yet been decided. But as many of you, I'm sure, know, or if not everybody knows, smoking in New York City restaurants and indoors is not allowed. And so that is not going to change wholesale. It will be the same way that we have cigar bars that have their own types of licenses to be able to smoke. So this would be the same type of special license. How they're going to allow for restaurants with outdoor seating that have 25% of their area outside that's allowed to smoke, are they going to be allowed to smoke cannabis since adult use is legal? Is that something that people are going to, is wait staff going to have to, is there any kind of enforcement, or is it if it's legal, you can smoke that here too? Those are some of the things that are not clear yet, how those things will be enforced. Certainly though, if, or if you have a rooftop bar, or a rooftop cannabis lounge in this case, how those things will be enforced. And also one note, and I think this is going to be very different because in California, you have all these great outdoor spaces, and you have fantastic weather all year round to sit in them. A lot of outdoor spaces, right, are in residential neighborhoods. So those are highly regulated as to what the hours are going to be, that you can sit outside on the sidewalk, that you can sit in the backyard, that you can sit on the roof. So those hours versus indoor hours tend to be very, very different in highly dense areas, which New York tends to be. So the hours that one can operate an indoor lounge versus outdoor space is also probably going to be very different.
Great. Thanks, Brooke. Yeah, and I would even just say, you know, sitting here in my 150 unit building, you know, that can be a great opportunity here, right? Just the concentration and the fact that some people live in buildings, residential buildings that are highly regulated over any kind of smoking. And the fact that you would need to go to a consumption lounge for consumption is valuable. And it could be a great business opportunity. We have some questions here in the Q&A. So first, is there a timeline for product label requirements for manufacturing process regulations? So for infused products or edible products, what we do know at the moment is that even for retail or any kind of on-site use, there will be a requirement at the moment to have manufacturing happen off-site at an approved facility, approved by the State Department of Agriculture and Markets. This is somewhat common in New York. This is also how CBD products are regulated at the moment in New York. You know, we had a change with everything that happened federally, as I'm sure you're all aware of in California, that restricted us from having, you know, CBD infused lattes and things of that nature. So we now follow that same regulation where any CBD infusions needed to be done in its own licensed facility. And as the market, adult use market launches here in New York, we will have a similar thing for THC derived infusions for edibles. Second question, based on the concentration of consumers in your tourist industry, you have an opportunity to create a robust equity program. Do you have any plans to create a licensing process that creates pathways for small businesses and equity operators? Yes. New York is, that's one of the signatures of New York's legislation, which I can let Tanisha speak more about because she's our legislative expert, but at the moment, 50% of licenses permitted in New York must be social equity applicants. At the moment, there is no, this is one point that there's an opportunity for advocacy around. There's no clarity on the percentage of ownership around social equity, but we do know that the goal, the outcome of the legislation is to reach that 50% benchmark. Does that sound right, Tanisha?
Yes, Charlie, that's actually correct. And also there's opportunities for small businesses, minority women businesses to take part in this program as well. That's one of the other great aspects of this legislation is that, you know, those that are entrepreneurs will be able to step up and have an opportunity to enter the space, whether it's from the dispensary or from the general retail shop aspect of this or delivery service aspect of this as well, which is another area that's very unique to New York as well, is having an opportunity to have the delivery service, which I know, Jally, you can definitely talk about as well.
Yeah, actually.
And one thing I just want to add to that is that staying with the topic of entrepreneurship is that there is language in the legislation talking about creating an incubator program to really support nascent entrepreneurs. So there'll be the details of that are not yet spelled out, but it looks like there'll be an incubator program and likely to be other forms of assistance, potentially financial assistance, to really try to support those small businesses and nascent entrepreneurs to get a foothold in the market.
Great. Do you think we've answered this other question from Michael here based on the challenges Los Angeles has
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, just making sure I'm not missing anything.
No, I meant the answer to Michael's question is yes, and for everybody, who may not have seen in the chat, Michael had asked, based on the difficulty that cities such as Los Angeles have had implementing their SEP and the associated delays with the city's licensing process, do you expect New York to have similar problems determining an equitable way to distribute social equity licenses? So my very quick yes is yes, this is something that is very difficult. Tanisha might want to speak a little bit more to how they were able to get far enough to pass legislation, to get far enough for there to be legislation to incorporate this piece, but how they're actually going to enforce it, how they're going to set up the rules, how you decide if a candidate is worthy or not, if they have the right kind of convictions, if the community is the right community, how do you distribute over lots of communities that may not be communities that have been adversely socially affected, or I don't know, socially is the right word, but if they've adversely affected by drug laws and convictions, but people who want to generate revenue for themselves to give back to their communities, how does that work? And so that's the long version to, yes, I think that will take a long time. And so since 50% are going to be the social equity applications, it will probably be that the straightforward, more corporate licenses are going to go first, because it'll probably just be easier for people to assess how to do.
So I would definitely chime in by saying that the Cannabis Advisory Board, which is the second tier board that's going to consist of 13 members, is going to be the main board that's going to be looking at the social equity piece. To the regulations and legislation. They're going to be the ones that's really going to flush out exactly all of the different components of the disadvantaged components of this whole thing. And they're going to be the ones to actually take a look and see, from a community perspective, from a health and mental perspective, from an industry perspective, exactly how to really flush this all out and put forth a set of guidelines that we'll be able to follow that actually makes sense. Because what we have right now is a conglomerate of a lot of ideas that were put together into this legislation that took a very long time to actually put together. But by God, we finally got it over the threshold. So we're definitely going to see this happen. And that's one of the reasons why New York put in the stipulation that, some parts of the law take effect now, and then the other parts of the law will take effect next year, so that we can have a little bit more time to actually flush out all these key components that really need more expert advice and guidance. And that's one of the reasons why the 13 appointed board members, which will consist of commissioners from the environmental conservation, health and agriculture, folks from the communities, folks from the industry, will be able to sit down and really take a look at exactly, and those from the hemp community will really be able to sit down and take a look and see exactly how this social equity piece can look, and also take into a fact that you have small minority women businesses that are entrepreneurs that are looking to get into this business, want to play a role in this aspect as well as those who have previous records. Folks whose records have been expunged, whose records will be expunged, will be able to have an opportunity to get into the industry as well. So all of that is going to be put into place, which is a really good thing for us here in New York, because having the opportunity to expunge a lot of the criminal records was a major, and when I say major, was a major component to this bill. This bill would not truly have been passed without making sure that this guideline was in there.
And Jason, thank you for your comment. That's a great point of the extra time that's required, and those types of experiences are exactly what we want to highlight and emphasize to our policymakers here. We know that you have a great industry structure and association there, so let's keep the dialogue open. We'd love to follow up with you and be able to bring in and share that experience with some of our contacts here in New York so they understand that as they're working through our processes.
And I just want to briefly go back to the, just responding to Jason's great comment there. Embedded in the framework that's been established in the legislation, these businesses are going to be given, I didn't see so much extra time, but I did see a lot of support, again, in terms of programmatic support, counseling, mentorship, financial assistance, business training. There really is embedded in the intent of this legislation, the strong desire to prioritize small businesses and small entrepreneurs. So I didn't see so much on time, and the regulations obviously have not been drafted, but I see a lot of language in there on other kinds of support mechanisms.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. That's a great point.
And I want to chime in real quick and mention one other piece to that, where you guys can play a major role as businesses that are in this industry. The whole entire social, economic, and social, equity piece is going to be a key component for us here in New York. So if there are opportunities for you guys to look at how you can get involved in communities, also how you guys can create programs of entrepreneurships within your industry, that will be helpful. And also looking at opportunities where you guys will be able to create I would say, a workforce development program where you guys are actually not only just doing trainings, but you're also looking at it from a legal aspect, how you can help folks legally, how you can help folks with organizing, how you can help folks with networking opportunities, and learning the industry, as a whole, can also be very helpful to you guys when the license application process does begin, because that's going to be something that New York will be looking at, is how you can play a role in the social equity piece.
Great. And we are looking at, we've heard January for a date that the application may open, with maybe a 3 to 4 month application window. Maybe a few things to highlight about what we're learning about the structure of our industry that would be interesting for everybody to learn. First, something that would be unique to New York is that there's a proposal for a delivery license in New York City. So this would be a bonded warehouse, a specific warehouse with up to 25 delivery people per warehouse, allowing for home delivery and allowing to respond to our rigorous home delivery market that we have here in New York, and attempting to bring it over to the legalized side of things. So that's one unique thing that's getting built out here in New York. As far as I know, it's unique. As far as vertical integration goes, we are looking at a largely vertically integrated adult use market with a few exceptions. This does also follow the state liquor authority structure that we have here in New York, which is what we call a tied house rule, which is a post-prohibition era rule that does not allow for licensing between wholesale, retail, or processing. However, there are some exceptions in New York for microbreweries or specialty beverage operators. And so we're looking at a similar structure here in New York for what they're calling micro businesses of cannabis. The scale of production has not yet been defined. For alcohol, it's defined by the percentage of local products within the ultimate beverage. But here, of course, this will be a slightly different situation because we're not looking at wheat and barley and things like that. But that is one way that you can have a vertically integrated operation, is by being defined as a micro business. There's an opportunity at the moment to help and inform what that definition is. But that is something that will be ironed out in the next 6 to 8 months. Another way that you can have a vertically integrated business in New York is if you are one of the 10 registered organizations that have been approved to be a medical operator. Medical operators were forced to vertically integrate, and they are being given some allowances to maintain that vertical integration. One other type of license to highlight is that in addition to the food kind of infusion and food processing licenses, that there will be special one-day permits for events and catering purposes. And we have a similar structure through the state liquor authority for that as well, one day on-premise event liquor licenses. So just wanted to call out a few of the ways that a few of the areas that are getting defined at the moment. I see we have another question.
I can actually touch upon a little bit on the banking aspect.
Okay, great.
There are a lot of community banks here in New York that have stated that, they will be making themselves available and promoting that they will be open to loans for folks who will need loans to apply for small business opportunities in the cannabis industry. So that is something that, we're very happy about, is that the community banks are now taking part in this as well, because a lot of the community banks are not getting, federal, do not follow the federal guidelines per se. So they are stepping up. So that's going to be really big for us here in New York, especially in communities of color where a lot of the local community banks are. So that's going to be big for us here.
I also want to mention that embedded in the statute is the Cannabis Control Board, which is one of the kind of main authorities here, has the authority to recommend zero interest loans and low interest loans. And that's just, again, just a couple of the financial assistance tools that are going to be at play under this framework. So just responding to the kind of capital needs, I think the policy folks on the state level really are thinking about that seriously and taking that very seriously. I wouldn't be surprised if the State Economic Development Agency plays a role, because they're kind of touched upon as how the board may recommend to ESD to issue zero interest or low interest loans. So that's got to be fleshed out, but I would not be surprised if that makes it into the final set of regulations.
And then in regards to Jason's comments about grants, fees, and waivers and deferrals, yes, there will be opportunities. The CCB, along with the Cannabis Advisory Board, will be actually looking at different types of waivers that will be offered through the social equity program.
I think there's also something to be said, and this is going to take some time to work out, not just how people can come up with the knowledge for how to come into compliance and the money for how to do so, but how the partnerships are going to work for the people with money and knowledge who can't get a license without a social equity partner, and the social equity applicants who can't move forward without money, and how those partnerships are going to work, and who will be the primary, obviously, will have to be the social equity applicants, but what the relationship, business relationship is going to be, and how those things are going to play out remain to be seen. And I think from an operational standpoint, communities are probably more interested in having established operators and people with a good business plan and good security plans, and can really fund to have all of the right, you're talking about, regulations and bring your space up to code. If you're talking about a space in which you're smoking, right? I mean, now you have additional fire department approvals, et cetera. So, that is a partnership that I think people are going to really want to see. And so how those partnerships come about organically or otherwise will take some time.
By the way, and Brooke, you're just talking, but I know that it's, I'm just thinking of the last comment from Jason on building regulations and permitting. To the extent that cannabis businesses are looking to do build out work, renovation work. They got to pull permits. They've got to get sign-offs and approvals. You know, Brooke and her entire team have really deep experience at helping businesses to complicate the labyrinthine challenges of getting those approvals, you know, in the New York City world. So, you know, that's never easy. And it's going to be just as complicated for these cannabis companies that are looking to get those kinds of approvals.
Thank you, Jeff. And I think I'll just one note on that is that goes for up and down the different tiers, right? Not just for offsite dispensaries and on-site consumption lounges, but for all of produce manufacturing, all of those areas are going to if you need a space. I mean, I'm in the habit of saying if you have a spot, you are in real estate. So whether that can mean you're a school, you're a hospital, you are a cannabis grower. You know, if you have a plot of land and you have to do something with it, someone is going to regulate it, and you're going to need permissions to do certain things. So between myself and my team and Richard and the land use team, we help navigate through all of those areas. So thank you, Jeff.
Okay. We also have a question from Jeff McConnell here. Please describe the permitting process in New York City and the ability to forego plan check. That's for somebody else, not me.
And forgive, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to take that, and I don't know if there's an opportunity to drill down a little bit, because our languages are all a little bit different in terms of our internal lingo. But plan check in terms of the Department of Buildings or something like that, in terms of how to get ahead of the permitting process, you can have a build out for a retail operation and put in your sprinkler systems and put in your banquettes and get permissions for various types of things in advance of the application process. So there are areas where you can be pursuing things concurrently. But like you can't, if we're talking about a liquor license, you can't get your liquor license until you have your certificate of occupancy for the building. So there are some things that you can pursue in tandem, but there are other pieces that you just can't skip over. And if that is not the answer to your question, I apologize.
Richard, any thoughts to add from a planning perspective on that?
No, I think that's a good response from Brooke. One thing about the zoning, if the city were to change the zoning to try to overlay additional requirements, that will take a long time. Given the city's land use requirements for zoning changes, that could take anywhere from 12 months or more. So my own thinking, given that there's a desire at all levels of government to make this happen, both at the state level and New York City, they will come up with a scheme that primarily sets the rules at the state level, and then there are a whole range of uses where these could fit into currently allowed uses at the local level. So I mentioned before restaurant uses, retail uses. These are allowed widely across the city. Commercial zones are mapped, unlike maybe some other areas in cities in California or towns. New York City, they are mapped in every borough in all locations. So once one meets the zoning requirements in terms of the allowed uses, then it goes into whatever permit requirements would likely be layered on top of that. I hope that's helpful.
Brooke, I was just going back to Jeff McConnell's question. Do you think that, I know that this is really new, super new, and nothing's really defined, but do we think that cannabis businesses will have to go through the standard New York City permitting process, or there'll be a express lane kind of thing?
You know, you get into the habit of shaking your head and doing all of these very dramatic, you know, because you're so used to being on Zoom and not talking. But I don't think there's going to be any fast tracking. I think that there is enough time that it will take. I think it will take enough time to get the application process sorted out, right? I mean, if you haven't appointed the people yet, the people can't design the application process to design the forms for you to submit the forms, for somebody to review your forms, right? So you have this entire arc that hasn't even started yet. So the idea that you would then create a process to fast track a piece of it, I don't think that the initial timeline from the legislation piece justifies that. And I don't think from a liability standpoint, the city would want to do that. There is a program called NBAT, which started many, many years ago, which is a new business accelerator. And it's really like this might not be the kindest thing to say, but if it worked really, really well, I might be out of a job because it's, you know, it's a check mark. Here are all the permits that you need if you want to open an X, whether that's a nail salon or a restaurant. And it tells you all sorts of things. Oh, you're going to need this from the fire department. You're going to need this from this. And that part works very well, but it is so nuanced and you need so many different things and what the requirements are going to be for this type of a business. You know, what are the security requirements? What kind of cameras do you need to put in? If you're in a downtown historic district and you have a landmarked building and you have to put cameras outside as a requirement, you now have a whole other layer of permissions that you have to go through. So I think it's too soon to think about how they're going to do this. It's also not clear to me that the scale is such that it makes sense for the city to try to figure that out. You know, if we were like California, we were doing thousands and you could see directly how quickly that was, you know, going to be revenue. There might be an incentive to do that, but it's not clear to me that that piece of it is what anybody's thinking about. And I'd be happy to be wrong.
Thank you, Brooke. On that note, I will say this. As you've heard, the legislation, you know, has passed and there's still a lot of unknowns and there's also still a lot to be done with this process. The Office of Cannabis Management is up and running as an agency, but in terms of the individual intricate parts, there's still a lot of missing pieces to the puzzle that have to be put into place. But I will say this to all of you that are listening, this is still an opportunity for you to get into business here in New York. There's still opportunities for you to learn through us, through Capalino, exactly how we can assist you with getting your licenses here in New York. This is a great opportunity. This is a great time for you to help the communities here in New York, as well as to expand your businesses and have opportunities to grow even farther than you even thought you could. Whether you are big, whether you are small, Capalino is here to assist you with that. From the licensing aspect, from the business development aspect of this, from the zoning aspect of this, to the hospitality, to the financial, and also from the legislative and agricultural side. We are the team that can provide you with this information. And I'm hoping that the information that we've provided to you at this early stage is an opportunity for you to learn more from us, and stay tuned for more opportunities to learn additional information from us as the legislation moves forward and as our Office of Cannabis Management continues to grow and our control board gets into place and our advisory board gets into place. We will have more information to say, and also stay tuned for our blogs that will be coming out as well on this information regarding cannabis. This is a new opportunity for us, and we're hoping that you will join us and continue to learn from us. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.